Hi everyone. So I wanted to let you in on a conversation that the youth and I have been having about Psalm 111, the psalm that we just read, which is one of the lectionary readings for today. This isn't going to exactly be a sermon, it's more like just sort of pulling together some biblical thoughts into a kind of conversation starter. So anyway, when we were talking about that psalm, verse 4 really stood out to us. God has built a memorial to God's wonders. Now that's my translation. The NRSV puts it like this: He has gained renown by his wonderful deeds. And the NIV has it, He has caused his wonders to be remembered. And the Common English Bible, God is famous for his wondrous works. Now those are all fine translations and they work just fine. But each of them misses something that's there in the Hebrew that I want to draw our attention to. This is how it goes in Hebrew. Zecher asala niflotav. Now I know that some of you in the congregation have had some background in Hebrew, so I thought I'd throw that in there for you. But I also want to point this out. That first word, zecher, is the word memorial. It's a noun, a thing, a memorial. And just like in English, the word memory is embedded in the word memorial. In Hebrew, the concept of memory, zachar, is embedded in that Hebrew noun, zecher. So the image here isn't just that God is famous or has done memorable things. The image is of God with hammer and chisel in hand, pounding out a memorial, a zecher, to God's wonders. Now some of you might know that in addition to being the interim youth director here at Oakhurst, I'm also a biblical scholar, aka professional Bible nerd. And I happen to have been doing some research lately on ancient memorials, so I thought I could share a few of these with you. Here's the first one. It's called the Merneptah Stele, named after Pharaoh Merneptah. It was found in Egypt and dates to about 1200 BCE. Merneptah had this stone monument built in order to commemorate, and there's that memory word again, commemorate, his victory over several peoples along the Mediterranean coast. This is a big stone monument. Here's a little size comparison so we can see how big this thing actually is. Anyway, among those conquered peoples, Merneptah mentions way down at the bottom of the stele, in the second to last line, the people Israel, which is actually the first reference to Israel that we have outside of the Bible itself. So here's another one. This is known as the Mesha Stele, or also known as the Moabite Stone. It's not quite as big as the Merneptah Stele, but still pretty impressive. And here's some of the lettering up close, which is pretty cool to see. This is from about 840 BCE. It's from the little kingdom of Moab, which was on the eastern side of the Dead Sea, just across from Israel. It's important to historians because it mentions Israel's God by name. But for our discussion here, it's important because it's another of these memorials that was set up in ancient times in order to spark the memory of the people, this time about King Mesha's victories and his impressive building projects. So here's another really cool one. This is another victory stela, which was set up about the same time as the Moabite Stone in the 9th century, and this was in the city of Dan. It was set up probably by the Aramean king Hazael in order to commemorate his victory over Israel and Judah in a famous battle. Now this one would have, these are just fragments of it, it would have been part of a bigger stela, a bigger stone tablet like the ones that we saw before. One of the things that's really cool about this one is that you can probably see there where it's been highlighted in the image, but this is the only reference outside of the Bible from the ancient times to King David, where it shows here that Hazael says that he was able in this battle to kill the king of the house of David. Anyway, these types of memorials were common in the ancient world, and not just to commemorate military victories. You might have heard of the Code of Hammurabi. This was an ancient law code, one of the oldest that we have. and it was found inscribed on a big Babylonian monument that would have been set up for public viewing way back in the 18th century BCE. Even though most people who would have seen this in real life wouldn't have been able to read the inscriptions that are on most of the cylinder there, they would have been able to recognize and interpret the artwork that's up at the top. This is an image of the god Shamash, who's seated here on a throne, entrusting justice to King Hammurabi. So the whole point of this monument is that King Hammurabi has justice, he has this justice thing covered. These sorts of memorials are not just relics of the ancient past. We, of course, have our own memorials too. And some of them we celebrate, and others we find somewhat problematic. But they all do the same thing that memorials did way back in the ancient world. They reinforce the memories that we want to hold on to as a people. And as a side note, this is why the whole debate over Confederate monuments is so charged. Some people want to downplay the power of monuments to say that they're simply relics of the past and don't really do anything in the present. But in my humble opinion, this viewpoint is pretty ignorant of the pervasive power of monuments and the way that they've done that throughout human history, the way that they reinforce and perpetuate and give physical and psychological scaffolding to the ideas and ideologies that they commemorate. Memorials aren't benign, they have real power. They function as a trigger to bring to mind and to reinforce the values that are most important to us. So I'm getting a little off track here, but hopefully that helps us consider the meaning and the usefulness of memorials, both in the ancient world of our psalm and in our own world. So let's come back to that psalm. If these types of memorials are in the cultural backdrop, how does this open up the meaning of Psalm 111 verse 4? Now remember, this is a poem, so we're not meant to think that God has literally chiseled out a stone monument. Instead, the poem says, beauty, majesty, those are God's accomplishments. Those are the things that last forever. They are the memorial that God has chiseled out. And what are the memories, the values, the ideas that God's memorial is meant to trigger for the gathered witnesses? Well, the whole rest of the psalm spills them out one after another. God is gracious, compassionate, a provider, a doer of truth and justice. And God has given us ways to be reminded of all of this. All right, one more little tidbit from my biblical research. There are plenty of these kinds of memorials written about in the Bible. You might remember in Genesis when Jacob has a vision of a stairway to heaven over at Bethel. Well, his response is to take the stone that he had been using for a pillow, and he sets it up as a memorial to God. Generations later, when the Israelites finally crossed through the Jordan and into the promised land in the time of Joshua, he has the leaders pick up 12 huge stones from the riverbed and set them up on the shore of the Jordan in order to be a memorial so that future generations can see these stones and remember what God had done for the people. And in the other Old Testament text that we read today, 1 Samuel 7, after God defends the Israelites from the Philistines by throwing the enemy into a panic, Samuel finds a big stone and sets it up, and he calls it Ebenezer, which is a Hebrew phrase that means simply stone of help, because God had helped them. That's why we sing in the song, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, Here I raise mine Ebenezer, hither by thy help I'm come. The song is saying that each of us who sing can lift up a memorial to God's presence and God's help in our lives. And this got us talking in the youth group about the things that trigger our memory of what God is like and what God has done. And so we started looking around our bedrooms and our workspaces to find things that are special to us that serve as memorials of who God is to us. And we want to share those with you right now, in the hope that you might also consider, what do you have that can serve as a memorial a trigger for your imagination, to help you remember in these chaotic times what God is like and what God has done in your life.